The way I see it, there were really just two things that mattered yesterday. The first is that Trump is once again slapping 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, our friendly neighbors to the north and south. And number two, he's completely abandoned Ukraine, siding with Russia. You know, the bad guys in all of our movies. So yeah, maybe we are the bad guys now. Welcome to what I am calling the Homeless Conservative Daily for now. There's just too much going on to highlight everything that happened this week in one show a week, in my opinion. So I thought I would do a shorter daily show with the goal of highlighting the most important things that happened yesterday in U.S. politics so that you can be the smartest person in the room today. That's really easy when you're me and you work in this office by yourself all day, because the only other living being in this office is like my dog, and he licks his butt a lot. So I feel like I'm smarter than him, but you can be the smartest person at your office or the laundry room or wherever you hang out and listen to this. So thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. I'm going to try not to take up too much of your time. So let's start with Ukraine. Okay. You probably heard about Friday's Oval Office blowup that happened between J.D. Vance, Donald Trump, and Zelensky in front of a room full of press. It was super awkward and embarrassing. Here's a clip of that.
We're going to feel very good.
Feel influenced.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influenced.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country, that's back to you, far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once? This entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you? You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you can...
He's not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country's in big trouble.
Can I answer?
Wait a minute. No. You've done a lot of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning. You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
you haven't been
in this
alone.
cabinet.
You haven't been alone.
In this cabinet.
We gave you, through this stupid president, $350 billion. We gave you military equipment, and your men are brave, but they had to use our military.
What about
if you didn't have our military equipment, if you didn't have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3 days. I heard it from Putin. In 3 days. This is something
maybe
new.
Less.
In 2 weeks. Of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this.
Again,
I tell you.
Just say thank you.
I said a lot of
except that they're
American.
So that was certainly embarrassing, in my opinion. But of course, some of the MAGA world has gone to claiming that this was all Zelensky's fault. So, of course, there is... this from the New York Post: Zelensky was the true instigator of the Oval Office fracas, not an ambush from Trump. This author goes on to claim that, but Zelensky had other ideas. He contradicted, interrupted, and insulted Trump even before Vice President J.D. Vance said a word. It was 11 minutes in when Zelensky first contradicted Trump with a gratuitous defense of Europe's financial support for the war, which Trump repeatedly has said was less than America's. But here's the thing. Zelensky is correct and Trump is wrong. Here is the total spending by Europe and America. This is in euros. Europe has spent 132 billion euros. We have spent 114 billion euros. And by the way, there's another 115 billion euros that is aid to be allocated by European aid to be that would be, I guess, euros, 115 billion euros. And we have a little bit more than that. I think we've allocated we've approved a total of 182 billion, but only 83 billion of that has been spent, and some of it has not even been allocated. I'll get to some of the details there in a moment, but this is not something where we are spending more money than Europe. I get that maybe if you took the individual countries, that would be true. But the other thing you have to remember about the funding for this Ukraine stuff specifically is that those European countries are spending a lot more percentage of their GDP. Got to remember that they are poorer countries than us, and they are smaller countries than us. We have 330 million people. I don't know how many Poland has, but it's nowhere near that. And Poland is right on the border of Ukraine, and they're spending way more than the sort of NATO 3%. I think it's 2.5% that is NATO's requirement to spend. And they're spending way like 6% of their GDP or something. So percentage-wise of their GDP, they're actually spending quite a bit of money in Europe. And yes, of course, we're giving a lot of money, but we're also richer. And by the way, we're not giving money. We're giving a lot of weapons. I'll break that down in just a little bit. So the MAGA world goes on to blame a lot of things here. They blame Zelensky for not wearing a suit. How that's so disrespectful to come in and not wear a suit. But if you notice, Zelensky always looks like he's kind of wearing this jogger sort of thing. But it's apparently, it's basically like a military outfit. He's been wearing that same sort of outfit the entirety of this war because he is the president of Ukraine and he is the leader of the troops, right? Just like we have a commander in chief. And so it's sort of a uniform of sorts. And by the way, I've never heard MAGA people complain about Elon Musk not wearing a suit in the Oval Office. That has not been a problem for Elon Musk wearing his trucker hats. And I agree. Look, I would prefer maybe people wear suits. I don't love the Fetterman sweatshirt. I know that maybe that's a little bit much coming from me, but I'm not in the Oval Office. I'm not a senator. I will wear a hoodie if I feel like it because I'm in my own home. But, you know, maybe there's an argument there, but I certainly don't think that we can say, oh, well, that is the reason this meeting went off the rails is because Zelensky showed up without a suit on, okay? As far as this complaint that he contradicted Trump, again, we show that he was correct about it. So how long do we expect someone to sit there and take it? This was Trump and Vance's fault, and honestly, the rest of the Trump team's fault for not shortening this thing. That blow up that we just watched happened 50 minutes into this thing that was supposed to be a few photos. It's like a photo op, essentially, and then all these people were supposed to go into a room and negotiate this peace deal, allegedly. So this is supposed to be Marco Rubio and Donald Trump and JD Vance and those people and Ukraine's envoy as well. They're supposed to go in there and they're going to hash this out, not in front of cameras. You're not supposed to do diplomacy in front of cameras. This is supposed to be a photo op. Donald Trump just can't stop taking questions. And look, I'm going to at least give Donald Trump this. I wish we could have heard more. I wish Biden could have gotten up. The last 4 years has been Biden avoiding the press at all costs and Biden only talking in front of a teleprompter and only taking questions that he already knew which questions were coming towards him. So it is refreshing to have a president that's willing to get out there and answer questions from the press. I appreciate that Trump makes himself available to the press. However, this went on for an inappropriate amount of time, and Trump should have stopped it earlier, or someone on Trump's team should have stopped it earlier. Marco Rubio, JD Vance, anyone should have said, we got to go here. The truth is, I think JD Vance wanted to blow this up because JD Vance has said on record he doesn't care what happens to Ukraine. I think that he doesn't like that Trump has sort of walked back some of the stuff about Zelensky being an alleged dictator and that Ukraine was the aggressor in this war. And so I don't know, maybe that's unfair for me to speculate on what the motivation was, but I would certainly say that JD Vance took this off the rails by claiming that Zelensky has never said thank you. According to some counts of reporters that were there, Zelensky had said thank you at least 3 times in that very press conference. So it's just not true that he's never said thank you. He's come to the United States multiple times. He's gone in front of Congress and said thank you, and we need your support. We love your support. And the truth is, Joe Biden was not that supportive even. Every time they asked for something, he'd kick the can down the road for like 6 months. Meanwhile, you know, thousands of people are dying in this conflict because we won't give Ukraine the weapons they say they want because we're fearful of, I don't know, escalating it with Russia. So I guess the MAGA world just expected Zelensky to sit here in this press conference for 50 minutes and take the lies that Donald Trump is lobbying right next to him about him and his country. So here's some things that Trump has lied about, by the way, just in this specific conflict. He claimed during the campaign that he would end this war in 24 hours, that this is so easy, he could do it in 24 hours. It's obviously been 6 weeks. That's not happened yet. He also keeps claiming that it's $350 billion in aid. And as we've just previously talked about, we have appropriated $182 billion. We've only spent $83 billion. And I think this is a really important part to understand about this Ukraine funding, because this is a common misconception I run across all the time. A lot of people think we are just sending money to Ukraine and then they're spending it how they want to. That's not how it's like 70% of the aid we send to them is military weapons. We are sending them tanks and missiles and F-16s and things that they're requesting, bombs, you know. we're giving them those from our stockpiles that we have, and then the money is actually going to American defense contractors to build us new versions of those to restock our piles. And we are selling that stuff to Ukraine. We're giving those weapons to them at the price of replacement costs. So they're not even getting it at a discount. We are paying the full dollar amount to defense contractors. It's essentially a jobs program. So as much as Trump loves to talk about manufacturing in the United States, and we're going to get to that when we talk about the tariffs in a little bit, as much as he wants to boost American manufacturing, almost all of these billions of dollars, so I think 83 of the $83 billion, 70% of it so far that we've spent is actually just replenishing those things. That's going straight to United States military contractors. Now, we can talk about whether you think that we should be sending weapons or whether we, need to spend less money on that stuff. Those are all valuable arguments that we can have. I'm totally fine with that. I just want to clarify that this is not blank checks going over Ukraine. This is not just money that we have to track. This is we're sending them weapons and then paying people to replenish those stocks here in the United States. So when Donald Trump then cuts off the funding, as he did yesterday, so after this whole brouhaha over the weekend, he's basically said, nope, no more funding's coming your way. Now, I have issues with this constitutionally. I actually do not think that the president has the power to stop funding that Congress has delegated. Congress passed these laws. Congress approved these funds for specific things and has appropriated the money. And Donald Trump is just trying to say, no, we're not going to spend that money. I don't think the executive branch has that power, not just because Donald Trump is in office. I don't think Joe Biden had that power either, or Obama before him, or George W. Bush before him. This is something that's gone all the way back to Nixon, actually, where presidents try to, what they do, it's called impoundment. This is a thing where the president tries to say, I'm actually going to say you can't spend that money, even though Congress has appropriated it. I'm going to say no on that. And so there's been some different Supreme Court cases about this, and it's a little murky. I do think we are going to get a Supreme Court decision at some point on this, because Donald Trump is not only trying to do this with Ukraine funding, he's also trying to do this with the USAID funding and several other things that Congress has said, we are appropriating money to this agency for this purpose. And Donald Trump's just saying, no, that's the ceiling, but I can say no to all of that spending. I'm not really quite sure the executive branch has that power, but that's a whole different discussion for another time. But Trump is turning off that spigot. And we're already seeing that Europe is going to step up here, and they're claiming they're going to support Ukraine. There are reasonable arguments that say that that should be what we do anyway. I'm a little sympathetic to the argument potentially that we should bail. However, this is becoming about, is America's word worth anything? Because we signed a treaty in the 90s that said, hey, Ukraine, if you give up your nuclear weapons, you got to remember at the end of the Soviet Union, you have a bunch of new independent nations that split off from the Soviet Union, and Ukraine is one of them. Ukraine, I believe, had the third largest stockpile of nuclear weapons in the 90s. And we thought, we don't really love brand new countries that split off from the Soviet Union having nuclear weapons. So how about if we say we will support you with weapons if you're ever invaded by Russia, and Russia will agree in the same treaty to not invade you, which they quickly, by 2004, they've invaded. So this is like a 10-year period of time that it took for Russia to go back on that word. So we know Russia's no good for their word because Putin's a brutal dictator, but we should be better about our word. And I think if we said we're going to defend you and we will support you with weapons if Russia invades you because you gave up your nuclear weapons, you gave up the one deterrent you had against Russia, we've got to do what we said we were going to do. I just think that's the right thing to do. I think America's word should mean something. And when we say we're going to back someone, I think we should back them 100%. That's where I land. But I think reasonable people can say that we should end our part in this conflict and let Europe deal with it, since it's really Europe's back door that we're knocking on when Russia, if they took over Ukraine, they're right there on the border of Poland. Maybe we just say Europe can deal with this. And until there's boots on the ground and we have to fulfill a NATO purpose, of course, Trump's trying to abandon NATO too. Again, what is our word worth? It's worth thinking about. But he stopped that. So I feel like we are the bad guy. We're on the bad team now. We are now supporting Russia. By the way, Pete Hegseth, our Secretary of Defense, has ordered that all offensive cyber operations against Russia, he's ordered those to stop. So I don't really understand what the purpose here. We're being nice to Russia. We're giving Russia everything they want, and we're calling Ukraine a dictatorship. We're calling Zelensky a dictator. We're saying Ukraine started this war. And by we, I mean Donald Trump and all of this and sort of his cohort of people. And I don't really understand what we're doing there. And it should be noted, I just want to keep in mind, just to reiterate, that Russia are the bad guys here. Because if we can't at least agree on that, I don't know how the conversation go on, but keep in mind, Russia did invade Ukraine. They've kidnapped upwards of 20,000 children and taken them back to Russia, and they're sort of brainwashing them into thinking they're Russian citizens instead. They are deliberately targeting civilians. Another common refrain from the MAGA world is, well, Zelensky's a dictator because he won't hold elections during this war. He's suspended elections. Well, he didn't suspend elections. The Ukrainian constitution requires that under martial law, if the government declares martial law, which was declared by the president, Zelensky, and parliament, they can't have elections. And to revoke martial law, it requires both parliament and the president to revoke that. Furthermore, when Russia is deliberately targeting civilians at things like funerals, what makes you think they wouldn't target civilians in an election? Beyond that, Russia is controlling 20% of Ukrainian territory right now. So how would you have an election where 20% of the country can't even go to the elections because they're being occupied by Russia currently? That would be like us having an election with only 40 states available. And I know the argument there is, well, we did it during the Civil War. That was a little bit different because half of the country tried to split off. But we still had an election during the Civil War. And that's a fair thing. And there were also elections during World War II. Although, let's say that got a little bit tricky there since that was the first time we had the president go for 3 terms, and we quickly changed the Constitution to not allow that to happen. So the difference is our Constitution doesn't have anything about not having elections. It says you have elections no matter what. And Ukraine's Constitution doesn't say that. So I think we're putting too much faith in Russia. We're putting too much faith in Putin to agree and actually abide by these agreements. But Putin has shown that he will not abide by these agreements. So I don't understand why Ukraine asking for security guarantees. Again, these are security guarantees that we gave them in the 90s and we're already backing out on. I know that seems like maybe a long time ago to people, but 30 years, especially considering that Russia started going in during the George W. Bush administration. We didn't really do anything about it. He did it again to Crimea under the Obama administration. Again, Obama didn't do anything about it. Trump has a correct claim in saying that didn't happen under his administration, and that's true. But then it happened under a Biden administration, and we still, we sort of supported Ukraine. We certainly give them some weapons, but we were always kind of dragging our feet with it. And I just don't think we've done the things that we said we were going to do. I think our words should mean more than that. So there are a lot of bad arguments about this, specifically why this is Ukraine's fault. I don't want to get into those now because it's just too into the weeds. But I will do an episode at some point about the theory that we and Ukraine provoked Russia to do this and that they had no choice. I think that's absolutely false, but I'll do that on a different argument because I don't think we have the time for it today, because I'm trying to keep this show short so that you can listen to it quickly and know what was important that happened yesterday. But speaking of abandoning our allies, the 25% tariffs are back for Canada and Mexico, as well as an additional 10% on China tariffs. So we already had 10% tariffs on China, so this is an additional 10%, bringing those up to 20%. You may remember about a month back, Trump said, there's 25% tariffs coming for Mexico and Canada. There's nothing they can do about it. And then within about 24 hours after seeing the stock market crash, and I'm sure a lot of business leaders and people in his administration coming and saying, maybe we hold off on this, they said, never mind. Canada and Mexico have said they're going to help us with the war on fentanyl drugs coming across our borders, which was a ridiculous thing to say about Canada when it's something like it's like less than 1% of the fentanyl that comes across the borders is coming across the Canadian border, and most of it's coming from Mexico. We should also keep in mind that almost all that fentanyl is originated in China, or the raw materials are at least originated in China. Some of it's manufactured in China and then shipped to places like Mexico, where the drug cartels are putting that together and actually making it fentanyl and then sending it across the border. So China is absolutely part of this as well. But that was the original claim was, well, yeah, they said they're going to give us a fentanyl czar on the Canadian border and do some more stuff with troops and things like that. And so that appeases Trump for the time being. He says, never mind, we're going to lift those tariffs. We're not going to have them. Well, now he said they're going in today. There's nothing Canada and Mexico can do about it. I am recording this at midnight. So there's a good chance that by the morning, it could be out of date because Trump could also change his mind once again. But these are 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Here's an important thing to understand about tariffs, in case you haven't heard me rant about tariffs before. They are an import tax on the items that are imported that are paid by the person that imports them. Trump often claims that places like China will pay this tax, or Russia will pay this tax, or Canada will pay this tax. That is not how it works. If we order, for example, a $1 widget from Canada and this tariff is in place, when it gets to the border or the port or however it gets here, there's an import tax that you have to pay before you can actually take the goods. And so we collect this right there at the port. And what happens is if something was $1, you're paying $1.25 for it because you're paying $1 for the item, which you actually have already paid someone for. And then you're paying a 25% tariff on that. So you're paying a quarter for that $1 widget. What do you think happens to that thing that costs the company now that imported $1.25? Do you think they're going to charge you 25% more? They absolutely will. And Costco is a great example of this. I like maple syrup because it's delicious. I can't do the fake stuff anymore with high fructose corn syrup. I can't believe I loved that stuff as a kid. Now that I've had the real stuff, I can't get off of it. So Canadian maple syrup, that's a pretty popular export from Canada, as well as Vermont here in the United States. Well, that was $12 at Costco before this. Now it's $15. $3 increase. You can do the math pretty quickly. $3 of 12. That is 25% of the original $12 cost. Costco's just straight up saying, okay, this is going to cost us 25% more. We're going to charge you 25% more. So everything that you buy that was made in Canada or Mexico is going to cost you 25% more starting today. Like just right now, everything is going to be 25% more. That's not just, maple syrup's a really simple example because it comes out of a tree, they bottle it and they send it here. That's a really simple manufacturing product. But when it comes to like lumber, we import a lot of lumber from Canada. So every house, a lot of houses that are made here, anything we use lumber for, that's going to get 25% more expensive. Avocados in Mexico. If you like avocados, we can't really manufacture those in America. We don't have the climate for it. So Mexico exports most of the avocados that anyone eats anywhere in the world. And therefore, those are going to be 25% more in America. And we don't have a U.S. manufacturing option. So what Trump is claiming these tariffs are going to do, let's debunk what he's talking about. He's saying that the tariffs can do two things simultaneously, which is impossible. The first is that the revenue that we get from these tariffs is going to be so much that we will be able to decrease the national debt or possibly even get rid of certain parts of income taxes or income taxes entirely. Okay, maybe that's true. Maybe we do import enough stuff that we get that. But simultaneously, he claims that the tariffs will also protect American manufacturers and that we should be buying stuff made in America. Those two things can't happen at the same time. If we are making money on the import taxes, that means we are still importing things like, for example, avocados and, the maple syrup we mentioned a second ago. That means we're not necessarily buying the Vermont manufactured maple syrup over the Canadian maple syrup. The other thing this does is it actually gives the maple syrup in Vermont, for example, a reason to raise their prices by maybe not 25%, but they can raise it by 15 or 20%, because if theirs is, let's say, they used to charge $12 and Canada charged $12. Let's just say they charge the same thing for the same product. Now, all of a sudden, the Canadian maple syrup is $15. Well, United States manufacturers can charge $14 and it's still cheaper than the Canadian alternative. And maybe the Americans will say, oh, I'm going to save $1 where I can save $1, especially when, the only way you can buy eggs or if you're a millionaire, so you're going to take savings where you can get it. But you're still paying $2 more than you were before the tariffs were implemented. And this has absolutely happened because everyone has to do price forecasting. These don't happen on a daily basis. This is something that a lot of companies have to spend. They're forecasting months, years in the future on what they're going to be able to charge on stuff. And very rarely do these prices come back down quickly. They tend to go up quickly and then they take a while to come back down because you're having to deal with competition and things. So my big problem with this is that the prices are just going to go up across the board. And it can't do both things at the same time. He can't get all the money from tariffs and protect American manufacturing. It's just, you can't do both those things at the same time. So what I think will definitely happen is that you will see prices go up on all sorts of things in the American economy. And you've got to remember that Joe Biden got absolutely punished, and the Democratic Party as a whole got punished for the about 8 to 9% inflation that we saw in specifically in like 2022, 2023. This is 25% inflation essentially on anything that gets imported from Canada and Mexico, and 20% from China. And Trump wants to do these kind of tariffs on everyone in the world. He's claiming it's a negotiation tactic, but what is he asking for in return? The good way he did this was with Colombia. This was several weeks ago when he's sending migrant planes of criminals back to their countries, and Colombia said, we're not taking these people back. And he says, you're going to take them back or we're going to slap a 25% tariff on you. And if you still don't do it after a week, it's going to be a 50% tariff. That is using tariffs as a stick to say, we want a behavior out of you. We either want you to stop a behavior or we want you to start a behavior. And if you do that, then we will relinquish these tariffs. That's how we do all these sort of sanctions on Russia too. We want to punish their bad behavior. So that's one way to do tariffs, but he's not saying what he wants Canada and Mexico to do. And here's another really interesting point. Trump signed a new trade agreement with Canada and Mexico in his first term, and he claimed it was the best deal ever, that NAFTA was before it was a terrible trade deal, and this was a great trade deal, except that he's the one breaking that trade deal now. So he's claiming his own trade deal was a bad deal, but he's the best deal maker ever. None of it makes any sense if you think about it for even 2 seconds. So what I think will happen is that prices will rise. I think consumers will be angry because the number one issue in the 2024 election was the economy and inflation. That was it. People were like, I remember my money going a lot further under Trump the first time, so I'm willing to roll the dice on that guy again because it's been terrible under Democrats. And I think that that was a fair assessment that a lot of people made. Well, when everything costs 25% more all of a sudden, I don't think that that's going to bode well for Trump. So I actually think this is foolish for Trump. I think he thinks he has the wind at his back. I think he thinks he has this mandate from Americans, but the real mandate from Americans was not to go, firing people in the federal government or to slash USAID or any of these things. The mandate was, please stop inflation. Please get prices back to normal. And this is only going to increase them. So I don't think it's going to work out very well for Trump. And I don't like tariffs. I realize I'm biased in that part. I don't think they work economically. I think they're bad. I think free trade is good. We can have a further discussion about that. I would love to. But as far as daily news goes, that's what's important that happened yesterday. And now you know what mattered. So if you want to read more, I have sources for a lot that I talked about in the description below. You can also drop your questions about today's news that you hear about as it drips in the comments so that I can answer those tomorrow. Thanks for spending a little bit of your valuable time with me, and I will talk to you about the news tomorrow.